What up, gunfighters? Blessed to serve you today. Thanks for gathering together in this virtual tribe where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, defense, survival, the right way, with God Almighty at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I'm going to forego the bio on this episode. Let's get into standardization of calibers. Which calibers to standardize and stockpile on. Caveats. I'm not saying you can't own guns in any other caliber, right? One of my go-to guide rifles is not in, my go-to guide hunting big game rifle is not in this caliber. I'm not saying there's never a case to have guns in other calibers. Those specialty rounds exist for a reason. They fill niches. Niche guns are not what we're talking about today. We're talking about standard calibers. What to standardize on, what to stockpile. Maybe we'll even get into how much. Let us gather together around this virtual campfire and discuss calibers, guns, things men, I think, at least probably in this tribe, enjoy talking about. 9mm. 9mm is and has become the de facto defensive handgun caliber of our time. Start off with a handgun because that's probably the gun you have on you most often. I hope if you're listening to this, you carry a handgun on you most of the time. I know we have listeners from all over the world, and I lament the fact that you don't have the human right to protect yourself and your family with the short sword of our day. But for those that can, the semi-automatic 9mm handgun is kind of the most ubiquitous choice of our time. It is the defensive caliber of our time for a reason. It's not the only caliber. I'm not saying that you're less than if you carry a 357 SIG or a 45 ACP. I may question if you carry a 40, but there are reasons for other calibers. But if you're going to standardize on something and stockpile something, the majority of your ammo and stockpiling for modern defensive handguns should be 9mm. It is so ubiquitous, the economy of scale. It's a good balance of shootability and effectiveness. A lot of the research and development, not necessarily because that caliber has anything special about it, but because there's been so much R&D with military, law enforcement, FBI into that caliber that it really has become the de facto standard. So that's a pretty easy one to recommend. And I got to tell a story. I honestly probably would have forgotten about this, but one of my old buddies who we have a long history, I was a manager for him once, and he was far older than me, and I think that created some friction. But we ended up becoming good friends, and I probably would have forgotten about the story, but he remembers it because it was one of his friends that I didn't know. I don't know if I knew it was his friend or not, a relative. And a guy came into the gun store and asking about guns, and I was the manager, and I was talking to him. I recommended a 9mm. He said, I don't want a 9mm. Everybody has a 9mm. And I said, apparently, everybody also has two eyes and a mouth. Does that mean you don't want those? Because they're the standard, right? Just because it's the standard, you may want something better, but it makes the most sense to standardize on 9mm. It's kind of the point of that story. It is the standard for good reason. There may be a reason why you want 357 SIG. It has advantages. I like 357 SIG. You may want a 45 ACP. Going back to those laws in those places, there are some countries where you can't own military calibers. Like you can't own 9x19. You have to have like 9x21, which is basically the same thing with a slightly longer piece of brass and the bullet seated a little bit deeper, but basically the same thing. But if you can have 9mm, that probably should be your standard defensive handgun caliber. The next one gets a little bit trickier because it's a tougher call. Do you go with 5.56/223 or do you go with 308? The 5.56/223 is lighter. You can carry more of it. That's one of the big reasons we went to it. It's got lower recoil. It's a great intermediate round. It is, at least for now, for the foreseeable future, the majority infantry weapon of our U.S. Marine Corps, U.S. Army. It's got all those things. The 308 is still used by the military to a lesser extent, but a lot in machine guns, medium machine guns. It's also a full-powered rifle cartridge instead of an intermediate cartridge, which has advantages. Better barrier penetration, better long-range performance, better, for lack of a more scientific term, more knockdown power, more effective round per round. It's a better crossover round for hunting and tactical applications. So which one of these do you choose? Well, I'm not going to. I'm going to say stockpile both. I think they're different enough and applicable enough that you should have both. If you want a good, well-rounded arsenal, I don't think you can have that with just a 5.56. You could make the argument that you could with just a 308, but they're different enough. They do their own things differently enough. The 5.56 is a high velocity, small caliber intermediate round. It has its advantages. It has its advantages even for hunting, for things like coyotes and prairie dogs and varmint hunting. It's fine for that. It's also, just like the 9mm has become the de facto defensive handgun of our time, the AR-15, at least here in America, is the de facto defensive rifle of our time. So it would seem odd to not have in stockpile 5.56/223. I think obviously that makes the cut, and 308 has its enough advantages that I think it makes sense to stockpile that as well. Probably have a rifle or two, right? Maybe have a bolt action rifle if you wanted to go the scout rifle route. Have a good bolt action hunting rifle, and have a good tactical 308 battle rifle, and the ammo to go with it. If I could only pick one, I'd probably pick 308. But really, they're both so ubiquitous and so good at what they do and have become the standards in their own realm. Like, one's an intermediate. They're both rifle cartridges, but one's an intermediate cartridge and one's a full power rifle cartridge. So I think they're different enough to stockpile both. I think that makes sense. Really, I can't see a case to stockpile anything else. Again, I'm not saying it's the only thing you should have. Especially if you're big into hunting, there are cases for many other rounds. But if you're going to stockpile a round, you can pretty much hunt anything shy of, big brown bears in Alaska that's affordable in North America. There's really hard to make an argument for anything other than 308. You're talking about stockpiling ammo that would also cross over into the tactical world. If you're talking about an intermediate cartridge, you could have maybe made the case 10 years ago between 5.56 and 7.62x39. And I like 7.62x39. It's a great intermediate cartridge, perhaps the most well-balanced intermediate cartridge. But I don't think it makes as much sense in this application because of economy of scale. The days of super dirt cheap, good 7.62x39 ammo are kind of not with us anymore. And that disparity is only going to become greater as time goes on. For now and for the foreseeable future, the vast majority of intermediate rifle rounds in America are 5.56, by far. There's plenty of other good niche rounds like a 6.8 SPC or something, but they're really not anywhere near as common. There is no other round as common here in America for intermediate rifle cartridges as the 5.56. So really that one is stockpile in that category. The next one, the 12 gauge. And you could say 20 gauge, but really 12 gauge, especially economy of scale. Whatever load you can get in 20, you can probably get it cheaper in 12 gauge unless you run into some crazy sale. So you're getting more firepower for less money. Not that you necessarily need it. There's a lot of good cases to be made for 20 gauge, and it's a great thing. But I think just, again, economy of scale and the commonness of the 12 gauge. It's used by law enforcement, it's used by the military, it's the most common hunting shotgun round, and the shotgun is the most versatile of the long guns. I've said it before, if I had to pick one long gun pretty much for anything for the rest of my life, it would be a shotgun, because I can pretty much do anything with it. They're great for home defense, they're great for most defensive encounters, because let's face it, most civilian defensive encounters are well inside 150 yards. The shotgun is great at that. Also, I can hunt anything with it, not just deer. A lot of people, when they think about hunting, they think about deer. But look at what happened to the deer population east of the Mississippi during the Great Depression. And look at the population density of America now versus the Great Depression. I don't know if you live east of, I would say, even the Missouri River, how tenable that is to hunt big game for survival for very long. Depending on the disaster, if it's a major disaster that kills off a giant chunk of the population right away, then maybe that's tenable. But if not, I have a hard time thinking that focusing on just deer hunting is a good strategy. There's a lot of other game. The shotgun excels at that. The shotgun will kill deer. Just a regular old shotgun with a Foster slug or double-up buck or number 4 buck is a great deer hunting gun. But unlike the 308, I can scale it down and I can take mourning dove, quail, pheasant, grouse, right? All those kind of things. There's nothing as flexible as the shotgun. And if I'm going to stockpile shotgun, 12 gauge makes the most sense. 12 gauge really is kind of an easy one. It's almost as easy as a 9mm for that. 20 gauge is lighter and handier. 410 has its place, but if you're going to stockpile something, I'd say 12 gauge. And as far as I'm aware, nobody makes the short shells for 20 gauge. So even the weight thing, you can get lighter weight shells for your small game and things like that in the short shells in the 12 gauge because it's so ubiquitous. And the last one is both a pistol and a rifle round, although it's called the long rifle. The 22 long rifle. I think any battery, any stockpile should have these. They're good for lots of things, but primarily if you have all these other guns, they're good for training. And training is important. Up to left of this event, whatever it might be, or right of this event. And this event could just be massive ammo shortages again. If you're, let's say, over 20 years old, you've lived through 2 massive ammo shortages that sometimes took months to years. It doesn't have to be, asteroids and zombies versus AI, right? Stockpiling ammo makes sense for just semi-normal times. Again, if you're 20 years old, you've lived through 2 major ammo shortages in the U.S. COVID was a major ammo shortage. The banking crisis, housing crisis of 2008, for whatever reason, cascaded into massive shortages of ammo. It took, I think, years for 22 to become normal again to be able to get. For this kind of event, and for many others, stockpiling 22 makes a lot of sense. Survivalists will often sway back and forth between the shotgun and the 22. The 22 has a lot of advantages. It's highly mobile. It's the only really common round I know of that you could easily take 1,000 rounds and bug out on foot. Even the 5.56, you're probably not carrying 1,000 rounds on foot, plus your extra socks and your extra clothes and your sleep system, because all those things are needed too. And you'll probably use those more than your gun. So it's unique in the ability to carry that much ammo, but it's also really good for training. A lot of people just want to stockpile guns and ammo. You could have the tricked out best Scar 17 with the Gucciest, latest and greatest whiz-bang ammo. If you don't train with it, if you're not good with the fundamentals, you're probably just stockpiling that for somebody who is, just to be real. So 22 gives you the ability to train and to stockpile ammo and train affordably and to stockpile enough of it that you can continue to train even if there is an ammo shortage. Also, 22 long rifle is great for small game hunting. Again, it's great for that bug out scenario. It's great for a lot of things. So, calibers to stockpile. And again, these aren't the only calibers I'm saying you should be allowed to own or that you should own or whatever, but your main core calibers. At the time of this recording in the year of our Lord 2023, I think it makes the most sense to recap 9mm, 5.56, 308, 12 gauge, 22 long rifle. If you have good guns in each of those calibers, that's a good survival battery right there. Those are good things to stockpile. Should go without saying, but for your handgun, for your 9mm, you want good hollow point defensive ammo, and you want good ball ammo that shoots point of aim, point of impact. You probably want a rifle and a handgun in 22 that are analogous and able to train with, crossover with your go-to fighting rifle and pistol, whatever those are. There are some things that you want to train on with your exact gun, like point of aim, point of impact, recoil control, but much of that, if you have a similar handgun, you could, let's say, stockpile a lot more 22 affordably and train with it on your draw, on your transitions, all those things. But stockpiling a bunch of the 22 and stockpiling, a decent amount of 9mm, 5.56, 308. If you're only going to go the 308 route, obviously you probably want to stockpile a little bit more. 5.56 and 308, you might want to do both of those. You probably want to do the same thing. Whether you decide to standardize on, really the 2 grains that make sense unless you're just loaded and flush with cash is the 55 grain XM193 or the 62 grain of some sort. Those are the 2 most common grain weights because those are the ones the military uses, and I don't necessarily think you should go with either one of those exact rounds, but you probably want to stockpile a 55 grain full metal jacket, let's say, and a 55 grain soft point or hollow point defensive round that shoot same point of aim, point of impact. Or you want to go, let's say, 62 grain with jacketed, cheap, affordable ammo to train with and stockpile, and a good amount of defensive soft point or polymer tip, hunting ammo if you decide you were going to hunt with that round. And 308, same thing. 150 grain is probably your best bet unless you're rolling in long range shooting into this, and you might want to go with 168 or 175. But really 150 grain is the most common. It's easy to find. 147 to 150 grain in your cheaper but good full metal jacket ammo, and a hunting or defensive counterpart and a soft point, just your common cup and core. That's a good thing about 308. It's got plenty of power, so just a common cup and core like a Federal Power Shock or a similar round to that will be a fine defensive and hunting round. You probably want to stockpile both of those. Your 12 gauge gets a little bit more complicated. You're definitely going to want birdshot. Again, small game is a big thing, especially if you're trying to put food on the table. Your cheapest is usually 7.5 shot, maybe 8 shot. I would have a bit of that. I would have number 6 shot because 6 shot is a good all-around small game. Normally, you are not allowed to hunt ducks or waterfowl or even in some states much other game with lead shot. But in a post-apocalyptic world, I doubt that's going to be an issue. And lead number 6 was, when lead shot was allowed, pretty decent for waterfowl. And waterfowl is a big source of calories in a lot of areas. It's also better for your bigger small game like lead shot. Lead number 6 is okay for pheasant. It's okay for grouse. Things a little bit bigger than a dove or something like it. I'd stockpile some number 6 shot. I'd also stockpile number 4 buck. That's me. That's my favorite load for hunting and defense. Generally, I would have a lot of number 4 buck. I would also have quite a bit of double up buck and Foster slugs that shot point of aim, point of impact, and my gun. I like Federal True Ball rifled slugs, but there's some real advantage, especially if you want penetration. If you're talking about like anti-vehicle or something like that, there's some real advantages to Bernanke slugs. And not Sabo slugs unless you have a fully rifled shotgun barrel, which takes away a lot of the utility of the shotgun unless you have both barrels. But I would stockpile that. And then for your 22, there's a couple of really good choices to stockpile for 22. The Federal Champion is a good choice for both bulk and accuracy and reliability. Also, the Aguila Super Extra I really like. And kind of the standard is CCI Mini Mags. They're a little bit more expensive, but they're good ammo. So I'd look at any of those to stockpile. I would stay away from, even for training, unless you just want to train malfunctions like the cheaper Remington Golden Bullet. I would get a decent round because 22, the difference in price between a decent 22 round and a dirt cheap 22 round is not that great. And if you think you at all might have to trust your life to it, either putting food on the table or you go hungry, or it's going to somebody for defensive use, I really would stay away from the dirt cheap 22 and get a decent middle of the road 22, better in accuracy, better in reliability, less failures to fire. Anyway, so that's what I would consider for stockpiling of ammo. No special tactical tip of the day other than this. Right now at the time of this recording, ammo seems to be more available than it has been in a while. This is a good time to buy ammo if you're financially able and you're in a certain position. Now, my wife and I live as neo-nomads, so there's a limit to how much ammo we can stockpile and feasibly get around well. But if you are thinking about stockpiling, especially with the availability of ammo, yeah, bricks of 22 are not $12.99 or $15.99 or probably even $19.99 anymore, but they're readily available, and I don't see them getting any cheaper, especially with the US dollar doing what it's doing. I don't see the cost of ammo dramatically getting cheaper, and I'm not a prophet. I don't know what the future holds, but it's probably not going to drastically drop in price anytime soon. So if you're looking at stockpiling ammo, now might be a decent time, not when everybody's clamoring for it, whatever the next ammo shortage might be. Seems like when ammo is readily available, nobody wants to stockpile it, and then as soon as it gets scarce, everybody runs around looking for 22 or 9mm or whatever it is. So now might be the time for you. So think about that. I'm not telling you to go run up a credit card or mortgage your house, but if you got a little bit of extra income instead of the next widget on Amazon that you might forget about in a couple of months, as long as you're a regular shooter, probably a good safe investment is brass and lead. With that, your tactical verse of the day. From Ephesians, see then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. And I'm not talking about that in relation to buying ammo or not. I'm talking about it for your life. Are you actively seeking, Lord, what do you want me to do? Not, Lord, I want to do this thing, please bless it. Lord, what do you want me to do in life? What is your will for my life? Putting God first and what He wants you to do first, that's true wisdom. That's becoming a man. Instead of, I really want this thing or this girl or this trinket, and praying that you get it. Seeking God first and saying, God, what do you want me to do in life? And then having the wisdom and the discernment to figure out what that is, and the strength and courage to actually do it. Because if you pray about it and you're honest, and He answers you, you had better be ready to do whatever it is. See, then, that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Thanks for listening. Have a blessed day.